I know you wait. Hey, good evening, LinkedIn. Dave Wilson along with Raquel Boris, and we're going to be right back with the great guests that we're going to talk about tonight. And so here we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. Raquel, how you doing?
Good. I feel like I haven't seen you in a while.
I know it's been a long time. Well, I want you to take this show off again. We love having David on here talking about Before the Ashes Fall, but it's your turn. Please take it on out.
All right, everyone. So David Serafine, who you have at the bottom there, David reached out to me. How long ago did you reach out to me, David? Via LinkedIn?
I'd say about 4 months ago at this point.
Okay, so heavy thick of COVID. And you had sent me a message and you had shared your story that you had written a book on Alzheimer's and dementia. And it was adapted into a screenplay and going to be filmed. And you're just like, hey, I know that you have a big platform, kind of curious if we can just connect. And I was like, absolutely. And then from then on, I feel like we've become good friends. I'm connecting you with people. So I love having you back on because you've been on before. And then you brought a guest. You brought Dr. Richard Harris, who's an internist. Yes. And I love that we're bringing him on because being that my dad's a doctor as well, I'm kind of obsessed with how it works in the body, right? Where we talk about certain things, but you go to the cellular level. And so I'm excited to kind of hear what you have to say when it comes to dementia and how it affects us and how we're essentially trying to prevent it, right, David? You said that it's not necessarily a cure that you're trying to.
No, I think that, yeah. So, and I appreciate that introduction. And certainly I'm very grateful for Dr. Harris to join us as well. I think from my perspective, starting this journey a couple of years ago, watching two family members have the diseases diagnosed, and then watching how that progresses overall, people being thrust into a caregiver role, they're not necessarily equipped to do that, not financially equipped to do that, I think inspired me to go ahead and start writing the story. But from my perspective, yeah, I think that, to cut to the chase for me, of course, I want to see a cure for everything. I think that everybody would say we'd love to have a cure. It's the panacea. It's the silver bullet type thing. But I think from my perspective, the approach and the outreach that I'm looking to do is to give the individuals some semblance of control and accountability to start with and see what they can do to minimize or mitigate the impact of an onset of a particular disease. And in this case, I'm talking about Alzheimer's because that's what the book was about when I started writing it. So like you, I reached out to Dr. Harris. I just immediately loved his approach, his wellness approach, his podcast. I suggest that everybody follow that. I think it's not, I put that in quotes, it's not just for things like Alzheimer's, it's wellness across the board, but it resonated with me. And I immediately reached out to him just like I reached out to you a couple months ago.
I love it. Well, Dr. Harris, I know that because David's been really good about tagging me on a lot of your posts. And I love that you have a holistic approach because I think more and more people are going that route, right? With the organic foods, with natural foods, now restaurants that are farm to table. So I'm more aware of how important it is to kind of go that route. So I'm just curious, why did you even go down that path? There has to be a story behind it, right?
Sure. It was kind of like a long journey, but it started off with the fact that my family history is terrible. Like I was 18 years old. I was 19 actually. I was a biochemistry major and I had to take genetics. And one of the things they make you do in your genetics course is do your family tree. And so, I asked my mom about diseases and about my grandparents. And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, everything runs in my family. I had high blood pressure, thyroid issues, obesity, cholesterol, colon cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Like David, I had my grandparents, my grandmother on my mom's side and my grandfather on my dad's side passed away from complications related to Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that if I didn't do something, this was what my future was going to look like. So I needed to figure out a way to keep myself healthy because I saw what the generations above me were struggling with. And I didn't want to do that. You know, I didn't want to be in my 30s and be diabetic like my dad and my grandfather.
Yeah.
And so I said, this stops now. I'm going to figure out a way to beat this. And that was really what drove me into the holistic realm. And then when I went to pharmacy school, I really learned that medications work on the population level. So let's just say if you're treating 100 million people and you can save, 3% of them, that's still 3 million people. We're of course going to do that. But if it's just you and me in the office and I'm telling you there's a 97% chance this will do nothing for you, the person's going to be like, no, doc, like give me something that's going to work.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what people don't understand about medications is that the studies are all about population level. And yes, they can help some people, but really the number one thing in the guidelines and for everything is lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of physicians aren't taught about what that actually means, what is actually healthy from head to toe. And so that's really what my passion is just educating people so we can feel empowered to take control of our health, to live a life full of joy and purpose. And that is my life goal.
I love it. Because let's be honest, being that my dad's a physician, nowadays they prescribe medication because that's how they get paid is through those, pharmaceutical companies. And, it's very, it can be very bureaucratic. I don't want to, poo-poo on the medical industry, on doctors, but there is kind of an ulterior motive to prescribing a lot of drugs sometimes. And I think we do need to talk more about the holistic part of it, about your attitude. I mean, I get all the time like, oh, you look so young. I think a lot has to do with because I laugh a lot. I smile. I don't stress out. I think stressing is stupid because it's not going to change the outcome. It's just going to, at a cellular level, do me damage. And I think that has a lot to do with it. So I'm all for it. So let's talk about like what actually happens, David, with, you talked about the symptoms and so forth, and then I guess kind of dive into specifically foods, attitude, things that you can do to, prevent.
And I would certainly defer to Dr. Harris to talk about what you could specifically do to mitigate that. I think from my perspective, the one thing I wanted to do was to sit there and say, go directly to Z. For me, directly to Z means I want to make a global impact on dementia awareness, period. And so somebody says, well, yeah, but you're not a writer. That's not your trade. You're not this. I'm not worried about what people say you can or cannot do. What I'm saying is I want to make a global impact on dementia awareness and the specific diseases that fall underneath that bucket. So whether it's Lewy body dementia, it's Parkinson's, it's Alzheimer's, my goal is to say what I will do is I'm going to get a well-crafted story out there that resonates within you. You're going to make a personal attachment to it because you know somebody that died of dementia, that suffered from it. You want to then follow what it is that we're trying to do with the outreach. And I'm going to plug and play people like Dr. Harris that are much more skilled and suited to speak to the cellular level impact and demographics and things like that than I am. But for me, what I looked at when I looked at things like The Notebook, and I'm not making any negative remarks on movies, fantastic story. Still Alice, fantastic story. Away from Her, fantastic story. It's been spoken with a singular voice across the board, and it's not been spoken by the minority demographic, the very demographic that statistically is most impacted by those diseases. So for me, when you're writing the script, when you're seeking the actors, we've got a gender equality component with our director. She's a wonderful female director, award-winning. My point was, I want to do this thing the right way to shade in the spots that have not been covered before in the overall voice. And I mean that. And so for me, that was front and center, most important. Then I would say to Dr. Harris, now what can we do in our own lives to impact the way that this disease comes on? That's the way that I looked at it.
I had one question for you, Dr. Harris. Is when you said about your family tree, how would somebody, I've done the testing for the DNA and your background. How would an average person just go out and find out about a family tree to see all the issues that you found? Maybe how do you recommend that to somebody?
Yeah, the best part was I just talked to my parents, and these are conversations that families don't have.
Right.
Most people don't know the disease states that their parents or grandparents just have. They just know, oh, grandma's frail and sick. Well, what's she frail and sick from? I don't know. She's just frail and sick. I'm like, well, that's important information. We don't just get in our car and just drive without putting up a GPS to a place we've never been to before. And just like, I'm just not going to figure out how to get there if I've never been there before. And so that's the same thing with your family. There's so much information in your family tree, what your family members have been through. And that's a great place to start a risk assessment, because really what I do is mitigate risk. So I'm looking at everything from a risk perspective, and I'm saying, okay, here's where your risks are. Here's what you're in danger for. Let's get that down as low as we possibly can.
Right.
And so having that conversation with your family members, with your grandparents, if they're still with you, it's so important, just so you know from a genetic standpoint what you're predisposed to, because most diseases tend to run in families. We see that all the time. And so there's information there that I can work with to help mitigate that risk and develop a comprehensive wellness plan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I think unfortunately too, though, is a lot of our parents and grandparents, back in the day, that medicine still wasn't advanced like it is now. So like, for instance, my grandmother, she was schizophrenic, but she was never told she was schizophrenic, because I guess it was taboo. So you didn't talk about it. And then, my grandfather died of a heart attack at age 41, but he was an alcoholic, but they don't really know if he had heart disease, because at the time he's small town in Mexico and then just dies. And they're like, oh, the guy's a partier. He just drank and party. So they never really looked into it. So is there a way to actually get that genetic testing where it's super specific, if your family members are kind of I don't know, I think she had this and I think he had that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I do in my practice all the time. We call it nutrigenomics. It's basically looking at your DNA from a perspective of, what are you at risk for? Are you more at risk for inflammation? Are you having problems with detoxifying? Because toxins is a big problem in our environment, especially in the U.S. The U.S. has the worst job at protecting consumers from environmental toxins. That's a big issue. Do you have problems with your genes as far as being able to turn them on and off? And we call that process methylation. That's a known risk factor for cardiovascular disease and a bunch of other diseases if you have issues there. So what we like to say in holistic medicine is nature loads the gun, nurture pulls the trigger. So it's important to know what your genetic susceptibility is, because then I can say, hey, you have problems detoxifying, you have problems with inflammation. So if we really don't mitigate this, this is going to pop up as a chronic disease. Which one, I don't necessarily know just yet, but something is going to happen based upon these genetics. And so that's a simple test. It's a cheek swab. You mail it in, you get the results, we go over the results. And that's something I frequently do with people. Of course, I did it on myself. And when I looked at my genetic problems, I was like, this explains all of my family history, explains all of it here. And I was like, okay, if I don't have the right behaviors, if I don't have the right plan, I know the diseases I'm going to be susceptible for because it's in my family history and it's right here in the genetics.
Wow. So David, you had mentioned earlier, there was a statistic where, for instance, someone like myself, I'm very naive and very ignorant when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia, because I personally don't have it in any of my immediate family. I know of people that have, obviously you're, and so many other friends of mine. So someone like myself is like, oh, I'm not predisposed to it because it's not in my family. So you said that most people aren't, right? It's a small percentage actually.
So and I'll defer to Dr. Harrison on this, but the medical, so if you talk about early onset markers, where you would say that less than 1% had the early onset markers where you would be likely or positively going to get the disease, the other 99%, a lot of what you do, whether it's you don't get a resolution to PTSD, your diet, traumatic experiences you had in the past, everything like that acts as a catalyst to the other 99% of that portion of the disease, the markers that are included in that. And again, Dr. Harris, you can say that much better than I can, but the way I understood it was, it's not a death sentence if you have that other 99% of the potential markers.
Which I had no idea. I honestly thought oh, you have it in your family or you're going to be susceptible to it from the start. And the fact that there is a way to prevent and actually that's amazing to me.
But even beyond that though, so even when I started this story, I was looking for an editor for my story. And I said this before at one point in a different podcast, but arguably one of the most connected cities in the world. I'm not picking on New York, but it just happened to be where the editor was located. I referenced a silver alert in the story. And they had no idea what I was talking about. And so meanwhile, it's such an insidious disease, both from a social standpoint and from a personal standpoint, how the onset of it and how it continues to basically fester until there's a point of no return, to where a silver alert is somebody's driving down the road with no idea where they're going. They're 110 miles away from home driving until they run out of gas. So that to me was a key point of, it's something that is, again, it's insidious. It's not well known. That's why when I look for a global awareness program, it's where I'd get people like Dr. Harris to say, listen, do me a favor. I've got a film festival in Buffalo. I would love you to speak on behalf of that community is never going to hear some of what it is we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
They're not going to hear it. And so the same old continues to go on for another till 2050. You've got 150 million people suffering from it. I don't want that. I want awareness right now, what you can do to take control of yourself, take control of your actions to drive that number down. That's the goal.
So Dr. Harris, I have a question with that along those lines. What would you say are like the top things that an individual can do right now to kind of, promote health and wellness with themselves, and hopefully not only prevent them from dementia, Alzheimer's, but other diseases as well? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the medical literature right now, 40 to 45% of Alzheimer's is preventable. And that number actually just went up. A couple years ago, it was 30%. If you ask us in holistic medicine, we think it's closer to probably 90%. The reason we say that is because if you look at blue zones, these areas where there's no chronic disease and people live longer than we do, they don't have Alzheimer's. They don't have heart disease. People literally die from old age.
Yeah.
And these areas teach us so much about health and how our current society degrades health. And the biggest things that you can do as far as your overall health and preventing Alzheimer's and other chronic diseases is what you put in your body. Because what you put in your body determines what you get out of your body. And in this country, about 70% of the calories we intake are processed foods.
Yeah.
Processed foods aren't foods. They're food byproducts that have been chemically transformed with agents such as gasoline. For instance, if you're cooking with canola oil, you're cooking with something that's been transformed by gasoline. I personally don't want to do that. That doesn't seem like anything remotely close to what should be healthy.
Yummy.
Right. So the quickest thing about nutrition, there's a lot of back and forth about nutrition. There's no one size fits all with nutrition. But I always tell my clients, listen, if you're going to do one thing about nutrition, just eat real food. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, if it doesn't walk, swim, run, or come from the ground, don't eat it. If it comes in a box, don't eat it. And if you need a PhD to understand what's on the label, don't eat it.
Don't eat it.
Which is interesting because I don't know if you saw, it's the Netflix documentary. It was with Zac Efron, and he traveled around the world with a podcaster and who does holistic wellness, and they went to the blue zones because they wanted to understand, and they went to Italy. And Zac Efron literally hadn't eaten a carb in years, because in the States we're accustomed, like, don't know, carbs are bad for you. Carbs are bad for you. Well, he goes to Italy and all they're doing is eating carbs and pasta. But the difference is the pasta is literally from scratch. So just even the ingredients that are going into the pasta are natural. And so that's the difference. And I think that's another thing too, is that we need to reassess what it means to eat carbs in certain foods. Like, I think we have a very messed up way of thinking what is healthy and what is not in this country. I'm just saying.
Well, absolutely. It's so true.
Dr. Harris, is there a certain time, like when it comes to Dave, like with Alzheimer's and dementia, is there a certain age, when you said about the test for your genetics or anything like that, is there a certain age for that dementia and that it would show? Or, you know what I mean? Like, say if a 25-year-old would take a test versus a 50-year-old, like I'm 54, would you see more in my body than a 25-year-old, like with dementia, or if there was something that would stand out?
Yeah, so the tests aren't commercially available yet. They're for research. So back up a minute to the pathology behind Alzheimer's. Like, what is it? So Alzheimer's, what happens is you get a misfolded protein called beta amyloid. And new research shows that beta amyloid is actually an agent that our immune cells make to help fight infection and fight toxins. The problem is it goes too far. And so in research, we can do lumbar punctures, which means draw some fluid out of the spinal canal and look for this. There's also PET scans PET scans basically look for sugar, and you can do certain labels to look for different proteins based upon that. And you can look at how much of this is deposited in the brain. Now, those things aren't commercially done yet, but I think they will be in the future. And so what can happen is we know that the levels of this beta amyloid protein start to increase before you start to develop the clinical signs of Alzheimer's. Now, what we also know is that if you look for the right markers of inflammation, those will also be elevated even before you start to develop it, because really the root cause of all chronic disease is inflammation. And so if you check the right inflammatory markers, if you check for something we call oxidative stress, you'll see that people will have high levels of this. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get Alzheimer's, but if you have high levels of oxidative stress and high levels of inflammation, something bad is going to happen to you. It could be diabetes, it could be cancer, it could be heart disease, it could be stroke. I can't tell you which one just looking at that, but I know that this is something that I need to do. And so these are the type of things I start talking with my clients about. And I tell people, you really have until you're about 30 to kind of mess around and not be serious or on your wellness plan. But once you hit 30, everything starts to turn around the corner. You start to lose 1% of your muscle mass per year. Your kidney function starts to decline. All of these things, you start to develop plaque in the arteries. All of these things can happen usually around the age of 30. And that's why I tell people to get serious, because that's when you're preparing for when you're 70, 80, 90. Because people think these diseases just come out of nowhere. But I'm like, no, it's like a dam. Water will build up, and there's signs that the pressure is building up, but we just see when it starts overflowing, that's when you're diagnosed with the disease. But there were symptoms, there were signs, if you knew where to look, that this was happening even years before a chronic disease is diagnosed.
Well, just like plaque in your arteries, it's like you get a heart attack, it didn't come out of nowhere. You had plaque buildup in your arteries, and that was bad food and fats and so forth. But so let me ask you this, because you're talking about inflammatory. What are the biggest anti-inflammatory foods right now that you would recommend? Because I know there are a lot, but what are the big ones?
There are a lot. I mean, the classic, the simplest thing is get your fruits and veggies, people. Okay. Most Americans, most people I talk to, I'm like, what veggies did you eat yesterday?
It's because the keto diets were popular. It's because, then people don't eat fruit because they're like the sugar in the fruit, but they forget it's natural fruit. I mean, that's what I mean. Like we're still not educated in all of that. And it boggles my mind, It's
because there are some nuances to it, and things get pretty complicated with nutrition. I tell people for fruits, stick to berries and citrus fruits. Those are the best type of fruits for you. Get plenty of green leafy vegetables. Carbs, again, carbs aren't the devil. It's just the type of carb, the quality of the carb, right? If you're getting fruits, legumes, beans, all natural stuff like that, that's perfectly fine. There are societies that eat like 70% of their nutrition from carbohydrates and have no chronic disease, but they're real carbs. They're not breads and cakes and candy bars and sodas. I think it's 17% of the average American's caloric intake per day is soda, is sugary beverages. 17% of their calories come from something that provides no nutritional or mineral or any value.
And even diet soda is not good. I stopped drinking Diet Coke, I want to say 6 years ago or maybe more. I had to stop. It was like affecting my stomach, and I just, and I haven't had a soda ever since. I just straight up water, coffee, or alcohols. I don't know how good the alcohol is, but.
Wait, did you see anything with your mother-in-law early stages, like 2 years prior, 3 years?
So I think that her specific disease affected, this was one that went to church, minded her language, very socially aware, conscious a little bit. But when you saw language changing and talking about, swearing and things you would never, ever imagine somebody saying, not that person saying. So you would see subtle changes like that. You would see things being put in the microwave, being put on for 4 minutes that were not supposed to be in the microwave, stoves left on. You would see that gradually decline. You'd see the shuffling start taking place. You'd see the tremors that would take place. And at that point, you knew that it was much farther along But again, I mean, even at that point, you had already solicited feedback from doctors that said, yeah, but this was set in motion long ago. This didn't just come up just now. This is long ago. Now it's a matter of managing pain, managing tremors, managing symptoms, managing this. But I think the impact for me is, again, it's not, and I put this in quotes because absolutely it's heartbreaking to watch the individual suffering from it. It's the collateral damage and impact with that wake that is left in this particular disease that is something that I can't really put my finger on. You can't express the point of what it looked like, which is why I feel very strongly about a film. A film lasts forever. It's scalable. You can tell the same story in Asia that you can in South America, and people go, I know exactly what that is. I don't know the language they're speaking, but I know exactly what I'm looking at because I've seen the same thing. So when you pair something like that with it, with practitioners like Dr. Harrison say, they will talk about what you can do now with your children to stem that onslaught of the disease or the stuff that I care about. But again, you're talking about the financial impact, people buying Boost, people buying Depends, people buying lip balm because they're drying out. You're buying stuff just to make it more comfortable for an end that you know is coming. And that to me is heartbreaking. And the vast majority of families are not going to have the faculties, the facilities, or the training, or the finances to do that. They're not going to be able to do that. And that's the one where you find out, on the side of the road, heartbreakingly dying in a ditch somewhere. It's the reality of the disease.
Of that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So Dr. Harris, then kind of going back to before, so what would you say is the number one thing that someone can do right now besides nutrition? Obviously we should be healthy, eating healthy no matter what.
Right.
Is there something else? Like I know someone was talking about how doing puzzles or, exercising your brain. What do you suggest?
Yeah, that's very important. I used to study nerve cells in college, and it literally is, if you don't use it, you lose it. You lose your ability to generate and hold memories if you're not challenging your brain. So always be challenging your brain. That's a great thing. Brain HQ is one that's very popular with people. It's just puzzles and cognitive things to keep your mind strong. And the other thing, I always say nutrition is the king of wellness. I say exercise is the queen. You have to move your bodies. We have a distinct lack of movement in this country. Most people, I think it's only 6% of Americans eat right, exercise, don't drink to excess, and don't smoke. 6%. For something, the 4 very, very simple things. And that if you do them, on average, you can make it to 70 with no chronic disease. On average, people made it 10 years longer on average using those behaviors. So who doesn't want 10 years of their life free of chronic disease?
No, absolutely. Like my mom, she's 72, knock on wood, super healthy, but she's never stepped foot in a gym or has never actually exercised, but she's always been a walker. So, and I'm one of those people where I hate the gym. I'm not big in like running, sprinting, doing weights. I'll do yoga and I'll walk. So like walking is just as effective as all these other things, or
so it's interesting.
You really have to get your heart rate up.
I recommend that. I think we should all do some strength training at least twice a week. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean weights. That could be body weight stuff, but you still need to do strength training twice a week, mainly because you'll start to lose 1% of your muscle mass at age 30. And that your muscle helps keep you young, helps keep your metabolism up, and helps stave off, unwanted body fat. But walking is extremely beneficial. So you need exercise, but you need non-exercise movement time as well. They do different things in the body. So I tell people my goal for walking is about 8,000 steps a day. 8,000 steps a day cuts your risk of death from all medical causes by 50%. If you walk for 25 minutes a day, you get a massive surge in something called BDNF, which is basically brain growth food. So if you want your brain to stay healthy, get that 25 minutes of walking in. If you up it to 30 minutes of walking per day, you cut your risk of developing cardiovascular disease by 50%, diabetes as well.
That's a reason for everybody to go out there and adopt a dog.
Yeah, right.
Seriously, I mean, geez, it forces
Dave,
you.
This is a 2-part question for you, Dave, and Dr. Harris. Dave, at a certain age, when you notice your mother-in-law and you noticed everything coming on and changing, would then this goes to Dr. Harris. Would at a certain age, doing certain things, walking and eating better and everything like that, would that have helped to prolong? There's no really way to stop the transformation. Like if you're 60 years old, you start doing this. Can it, by changing your diet, doing everything, can that help or just prolongs? I guess.
So again, from a medical standpoint, that's Dr. Harris all day long. I think that if somebody would have said to me, if you could have rewound the clock back to 40 and the same activities were taking place at 40 that took place up till the day she couldn't swallow anymore, then I would argue that, yes, that would have made an impact to her longevity. I would have argued that with anybody, right? Because if you watch how the body changed throughout this process, it wasn't normal. There was nothing about it. The curvature of the spine, the shuffling, the tremors,
right,
things that are just not normal based on what you're looking at. This was a woman that was lively. She was spry. She was engaging. She was sharp as can be. And yet I saw little things where that just didn't seem right. That's not her. And it progressively got worse very quickly. And so for me, I would argue, I believe this in my heart, had there been a change in behavior, had there been modification in the diet, had there been meditation, de-stressing, things like that, had there been a holistic approach to what you can do from wellness, yes, I would argue she would have lived longer. It would not have ended the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do see that all the time in holistic medicine, where we've seen dramatic improvements in people just by doing some things like getting people into ketosis. There's a lot of good evidence with ketosis and neurological disorders. CBD, there's some good evidence with CBD in protecting the brain from inflammation and neurological disorders. Of exercise, all of these things I talked about, that BDNF, that's how our brains change what they need to do and how our brains repair. And so Alzheimer's is characterized by some metabolic issues as well. So if you can fix the metabolic issues where the brain now can function normally, do what it needs to do because it has the energy to do so, you can see people get better, regain some function. We see that all the time.
I'm like honestly like in shock. And this is once again, I wish everyone in the freaking world could hear this. Like just the simple little things that I don't think that people just don't realize. Like it's amazing.
But I think that from my perspective, I would say that all day long. But the thing is get that word out to more and more people. What's the vehicle by which you do that, right? And so the way that I look at it is, in my humble opinion, you can craft a story, you can put a film together, you can connect somebody to that individual community. You can have film festival is a perfect example where you have that community ownership and that dialogue taking place with something you were a part of. So the magic of film, the magic of a story is something that I feel can be very useful in this. But at the end of the day, every chance I get, if I'm on a podcast or on LinkedIn, I'm tagging Dr. Harris all day long.
Yeah.
There's a woman named Evelyn Nemeo who produced a cognitive app over in Ireland. She's absolutely fantastic. And so there's different pieces of this whole process that I would say that you can surround a film, plug and play this holistic approach to what you're doing to keep the mind well. And in my case, for the specific diseases of dementia, that's what I'm focused on doing right now. It has collateral benefit to other diseases for sure. My story is tied to the one that impacted me most and what I've got a passion for. But I think if you can put it together along with a film and an outreach, that is world changing. The previous films, again, fantastic films. Show me the outreach that took place in those films.
Yeah. So speaking of outreach and community, you were telling me that something in our first conversation that I was shocked about, the demographic that is affected most by dementia. So why don't you share that with folks? I think they would be shocked as well.
And you can research alts.org. You can go to Us Against Alzheimer's to get the exact statistics, but you're looking at roughly a 60% increase in chance to be diagnosed with those diseases by a minority member than you are Caucasian. And so from my perspective, if you look at the casting, if you look at the stories, all fantastic. I'm not knocking that, but my goal is, okay, there's a different part of this program that's never been addressed before in the casting, the outreach, the director, all of that paints a different picture, paints a more holistic picture of what we can do. But again, at the end of the day, for me, the most important thing is to connect that community that otherwise would never have been reached with people like Dr. Harris, with people like Evelyn Nemeo, these people that are doing the right things to prevent things from taking place. That's my goal. But you have to have some vehicle by which to do that. I'm not a medical practitioner, so I'm going to use whatever tools that was given to me to do that and connect pieces to those communities to make the difference.
That's the interesting part there. And Dr. Harris, when do you feel, I know you said like say 30, 40, and you find out, you know, you can sit down with your client, you can candidate, sound like I'm at work, but what do you tell somebody at 40 years old? How do you tell them, and you know they're not doing what they're supposed to? Like, what do you tell? Like, do you explain to the person just like we're doing now, what's happening in your body?
He hits them upside the head and says,
Yeah.
snap out of it. I'm just kidding.
No, but because it is interesting. Until I've gotten into this, I never heard of all these kind of different medicines and holistic, all that. I'm not experienced in it.
And you're a podcaster. Imagine communities that have no access to internet.
Well, yeah, those underprivileged communities that really have no access to any of this.
Right.
They don't know what LinkedIn is or LinkedIn Live or a podcast.
And that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. Is what the global impact can be if it's done in the right way. So sorry to interrupt on that. But
no, that's okay. I was just curious, like I said, what do you tell people? Because if people are overweight, listen, sometimes I'm overweight and the doctor will say you have to lose weight. You have a choice. So the choice is yours. But how do you really get to somebody and say, seriously, you need to do this or you're going to have this? That's what my question would be is.
I usually start with finding out what their goals are. And then I get people to go through and see exactly what they're doing that's either helping their goals or hurting their goals. And then I get people to, one of the things I first thing I tell my client is, listen, I want you to post your goals all over the house. I want you to post it on social media, and whoever is your most accountable and loyal friend, tell them that this is your goal. Because all of that is essential. People try to make behavioral change on their own, and nobody can do it on their own. Right. It's really, really hard. And so a lot of what I do is I give people information, but I also work on the behaviors and the mindset and the realization of goal achievement. And then I also get people to slow down, because some people, when they want to make lifestyle changes, they just jump like in the deep end without knowing how to swim. And that's when people fail. And I said, no, we take things one step at a time. You know, my current wellness program took years to develop. Right. But I still try to make it better. I still layer small change after small change after small change. And that's what got me to this position. So it's a lot of mindset coaching, and that's where we really make the biggest difference, because everything I tell my clients, they could go find on the internet themselves. You know, if you really know where to look, all of this information that I'm saying, it's all out there. It's all in the research studies. There's other holistic docs saying it, but it's really getting into the person's head. That's where we really have to focus on as healers. And you're starting to see that with the upcoming health coaches and things like that, who are really working with people on the mindset aspect of health.
Yeah, I think accountability is huge too. Like if you can find someone to do it with you and have that support, because last year, everyone's like, I don't understand why you're doing this on LinkedIn. So I wanted to do 31 days straight of no alcohol, yoga, and clean eating. But I told everyone on LinkedIn, and I started doing videos of it, and people were expecting me like on day 5, I haven't seen your video yet. And I actually posted a video 31 days straight of that. And it's because I did it because I knew I was going to be held accountable. I knew that it was almost kind of like in a competition where I'm like, I don't want to let people down, because then they'd be like, wait, you ended at 10, you couldn't go 31 days. And just the power of that accountability, it really helped. So yeah, I would say grab your best friend, grab a family member, and like do it together. And you know, the support is big.
Dave, when you're with your mother-in-law and you get to that stage, they go to the doctors. At that point, do they recommend, is it just, let's just give medications, or does it switch over to some of the kind of stuff that Dr. Harris has spoke about? No, doctors just say, oh, here's medicine, that's it. Or do they teach, does a doctor versus like what Dr. Harris does, there's a difference?
I think that doctors want to do the right thing. They want to say that, look, if you do this, this is better for you. But and again, I can't answer for a doctor, but I think in the back of their minds, when somebody knows that they're at a certain point of progression for the disease right there, yes, you can change your activities, and yes, that may make a positive influence or an impact over the rest of their lives. But it was so far enough gone at that point. Right. You're talking about, okay, the next stage is in this 12-hour care facility. The next stage is fully 24-hour facility. The next stage, they can't leave that floor. The next stage is, well, you don't qualify for this amount of funding, so you have to supplement that with, like I said, booze, diapers, wipes, whatever it might be. Then the final stage was she passed away in our house. So we moved her here. We had a nurse come in every hour, every 2 hours, whatever it might have been, checking vital signs and saying, yeah, it'll happen this weekend. And it was just a shock of that went from a facility. We drove her to our house, not even a week ago, set her up in a room, and it was that quick that it was done. And again, the one thing that I looked at is the one thing that kind of clicked with me was the number of medications that were here. And the ones that the nurses had to take away and destroy, you're required by law to destroy when it's all said and done. It said to me that that's not the way it should end. And so an awareness thing for me is I'm not looking to right now impact the people that are 7 years old. I'm looking to impact the people who are 13, people who are 50, people who are 20, and saying, I've got a great story. I've got great outreach. I've got people that are experts in doing this outreach. These are the facilities you need to the people you need to talk with. These are the practices you need to adopt right now. That's what I'm willing to do right now. That's what I want to do right now.
Yeah, I think we just as a society need to be more preventative in general, just with anything with children. I mean, financially, everything, teach them at a young age about credit card debt, and then teach them about how I think we really do need to go way back and not wait, until it's too late. And then, then you're like, oops.
Well, my final question is to Dave and Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, if you had 35, 40 seconds to just give the best advice to anybody listening right now, what would it be?
The journey is worth it. Because a lot of people don't start because they think it's going to be hard. It is going to be hard, but challenging yourself is fun. And once you begin to love the process, the results will come. So a lot of people want the results without loving the process. Love the process. And I'm a huge gym freak, but I told my wife, there's every single day, I don't want to go to the gym, but I know if I get there, I know if I get one step closer to my results, what I want, I'm going to love that. Wow. So that's what I tell people. Enjoy the journey, have fun along the way, and the results will come.
Nice. And Dave?
Mine is just a general statement with my course of employment, my career, and then certainly this approach here. Take control of yourself. Take accountability of yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to be prescriptive for you. Don't wait for somebody else to introduce you to the panacea that cures everything. Learn as much as you possibly can of what you can do on your own. Take control of yourself. And that's across the board and everything. That's what I would say.
Right. Raquel.
No, I was like mic drop. I mean,
no, I was gonna you want to ask your final questions there, and
that was wonderful.
It was
the journey and
the journey.
I mean, really, I think the journey with anything in life, period.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot tonight. I like the part if it's in a box.
Yeah,
don't eat it. I mean, like you said,
that's why my pantry rarely has anything in there, because I try not to have anything that's canned or boxed, or even my freezer. My freezer rarely has anything in there. Oh, look, it's Andre.
Yeah, Andre, he's awesome.
Yeah, so I try to I go to the grocery store probably every couple days because I buy everything fresh, and so I'm constantly going.
I'll just add one other thing, Dave and Raquel. Sorry about that, but the thing is, this whole thing's about awareness. So the more times it's shared, the more times you introduce people to guys like Dr. Harris. Obviously, Raquel, you've been phenomenal since day one for me. David, the same thing for me. This is awareness. Get the word out. Share this thing. Share the link. Research more on your own. Follow what they're saying. Ask questions. Engage with it. Take control of what you can do for yourself versus waiting for somebody else to do it for you.
Yeah.
Well, I have one final question for Dr. Harris, because that's where you start getting into it. It's like with Dr. Harris with children. I have a 10-year-old plus a 29-year-old, but there was different generations, 29-year-old versus a 10-year-old now. What do you recommend for children? The same thing, right? It's education, your parents to educate the child. Am I correct? Right. Or is there vitamins that children should be taking too? Or how do you just describe that?
It's a tough one.
Most of the time, I say it's just education, because children learn from their parents. And we sometimes forget how observant children are. They are literally hardwired to observe everything in their environment and imitate it. So there's so many times where I'm talking to people and they're like, I just thought having fast food 3 times a day was normal. You know, that's what I grew up on. Like, this is all I've known. I didn't realize that wasn't what you're supposed to do. And so, you know, part of what we do in our educational consulting company is help with that mindset and personal development and growth. And part of that is about health and wellness and meditation and all of those behaviors. Because if kids hear that young, it becomes normalized. You know, I still meet people all the time who are like, meditation, that doesn't do anything. Yeah. I'm like, here's like 100 studies I can show you that shows that meditation has a profound effect in your body. And if you don't want the studies, then why did every single society on the planet meditate? Every single one of them meditated. Right. And this was only a behavior that we stopped recently.
Yeah. All right. That answers mine. Well, I want to thank everybody, you know, and I know this isn't going to end here, Dave. We're going to be having a lot more coming up. I
want Dr. Harris back on. And David, I'm a doctor's daughter. Like, I'm a closet like nerd in that respect. I love biology, physiology, like it's human psychology, all of it. So I could have so many more questions.
It is, because I think everybody that's watching this, and please reach out to anyone on here, you know, David or even Dr. Richard Harris will put the information on there. And that's what it's all about right now, is just to get it out there. I agree. I learned a lot tonight. I never would have known. So it helps me. And like you said, if I would have known that 10 years ago, you know, you
would have stopped buying boxed food.
Well, it is because you don't realize when you said as simple as it is, what you said when you put in your body is what you get out of your body. That right now resonated with me tonight. And it's so true. What you put in is what you get out.
They talked about spreadsheets 20 years ago when I started my career, garbage in, garbage out. And I'm like, that was the most profound statement I've ever had to me. And it still resonates today, 20 years later. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody, and please reach out. And Raquel, you know how to do one of those screenshots?
Oh, yeah. Of course.
I still have to figure that out. It's probably just pushing a button, ain't it?
It's Command 3 if it's a MacBook. Okay. All right. So everyone file 1, 2, 3. Okay.
All right.
Nice.
All right. So thank you, everybody. And thank Andre and Tuvia, Timothy, everybody for being on the
show. He's a Steelers fan, though.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely. I heard Steelers fan. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night. And we are